Right, so this is the bit where you've sprayed your model with your primer paint. You've probably used Halford's white primer. This is good because it sands well, and you want primer that you can sand down. Don't buy the cheap stuff from Poundland like I did last week, because it doesn't sand. You're wasting your time. There are other primers out there, I don't know what they're like. I know that this one works well. For this model here, for this one block and the other block which I've done at university, I think I used 1 can per block. So I've almost used a whole can on one piece this big, because you need to build up about 4 layers. You need to build up the primer quite thick, because all these little pits and dents inside the model that you might have missed, you need to try and fill them in with the primer. So the model you worked on before, which would be this one, this would have your filler on it, and you should have sanded this really smooth, and you probably would have used, I would have expected a sandpaper like a 1200 to finish the surface on here. This model here has just been cut, there's no finish on there, it's quite rough, so I would have started working on that with a very rough sandpaper, but then you finish off with a 1200 on the model, and it'll make it very smooth. And that's important, because when you put your paint down, it saves you having to make lots of improvements later on, right? So when you come to sanding your primer, you spray your paint on about 4 coats, 5 coats of primer. It's nice and thick, and I've already started on this side already, and what I'm going to do is work on this side here. Now, I haven't touched this yet, and you can see I've just sprayed it, and you probably can or can't tell from there, but it's quite dented around here. You can see all the imperfections in the foam. We need to try and hide those, because when you put your top coat on, they're going to show up really badly. It's almost like a sort of like a skin effect. It's kind of crinkly and there's little spots in it all over the place. You want to try and get rid of that. Now the paper you're going to need to use, 2. I use a 400 to start sanding with this, and then I finish off with around a 12 to get a nice finish on the primer. The 12 is very fine, it just brings it up like a polish. And the way you want to do it, you want to use a little bit of soap and a little bit of water. This paint will move around to start with, but you only want to use it once, just to move the paint around enough to get an even surface. And when it's dry, you dust that off, and then you sand it down finally with the sandpaper. You only use the soap and water once, just to make sure the paint is nice and even across the model. And the way that you do that is you get your model and a bit of sandpaper. So I've got 400 here. Right, so I take a little piece of 400 paper, and this is why it's called wet and dry, because you can sand it when it's dry and you can use it when it's in there. Right, so you put a little bit of soap on the model, not much, just a little bit like that on the paint, and move it around the area you want to sand down like this. Right, and you can actually see the paint starting to come off already. Right, it's water based. You dip your sandpaper in the water like that, and you put that on and just work away at it. And what you'll find is, to start with, it sounds quite rough and it feels quite rough. So you'll know by the feel of it, it's kind of gritty. But after like about 10 seconds, you'll feel that it gets a lot smoother. Like now, it's not making as much noise and it feels quite smooth. And it almost gets a little bit sticky, because the paint is starting to lift off of the model, and it's starting to move around, and it's almost a little bit slippy now, like it's oiled. Right, so I would say I'm going to do this really quick, because I'm just doing this on the video and there's no point in doing the whole thing, and you would probably work in all the parts like that. So just nice gentle strokes, and all you're doing is moving the paint around. You can actually start to see it. If I do my finger there, that's all the paint coming off. So in theory what you're doing is you're just basically filling up all the gaps in the paint by moving it about. Now instead of rubbing that down, you don't want to keep rubbing it, because you'll take it all off. So you just move it around a little bit so it's nice and even, and let it dry. So that's done with, right, on this surface. I'll take that off. Now on this side, I've done these ones before. So I did this one about 10 minutes ago, and this paint's now dried. So all I would do is I would get some cloth like this, and you can sort of see here all the paint that was taken off before and moved about, but it's quite smooth. All of this is very, very smooth, but you can just see the bits of paint here. So I'm just going to dust them off. This isn't probably the best cloth to do it with, but you can push quite hard as long as it's dry. And you can actually see this is actually getting shiny already, and I haven't even used the sandpaper on it yet. It's actually starting to polish up, so I can just do that all over these surfaces on here. Now I worked on the bottom before just now, so I'll just move around. You can actually see this coming off in the air a little bit, like that. Now your finish is so important, because when you put your top coat down, if your top coat goes on top of a rough primer finish, it'll look just as bad as your blue foam models did, right? So you don't want that. You want to make sure that this top coat that you put on here is mint, and that way it will start to look like a real product. It won't look like a model anymore, it'll start to look like plastic, right? So I've taken all that paint off, I've given that a good rub, right? So this side's better than the others, so give that a rub like that, and you can actually see this is kind of shiny. Now at this point what I can do is take another piece of 400, right, now that it's dry. Don't use the soap anymore, and I can have a look in it, and I can see down the bottom here there's some like dimples, a couple of little holes, but generally it's quite smooth, right? So now I can use this sandpaper now and just actually sand down just on the little bits where I can see the dimples. So I can see a couple here, right, so I can just get in there, working in circles, right? Don't work backwards and forwards in lines, because you'll scratch lines into the model. You don't want to do that. You want to work in little circles and like vary the pressure. So sometimes you push down hard, sometimes you push down lightly, and just work your way around the model like that. Right, so if I just do this top surface as well, just to illustrate quickly, like this. Right, that'll do. Alright, so we'll get rid of that. Go back to this duster. Take this off. Okay. Now, what you can do is that you can move to the 1200 if you really want, because that's much finer. And you can just give that one more going over with the 12, just quickly. You don't have to put a lot of time in with this, because you do a lot of the work with the 400. Right? This will just bring the paint up really, really smooth. Take that off, like that. Now, I don't know whether you can see the difference or not. If I compare, this was the side that I just did before with the water. It's quite rough still. There's bits in there I haven't sanded. But this piece here is it's hard to see, but that's really shiny, right? Really, really smooth. It feels soft all the way along. Nothing rough. Completely perfect. That's how your primer should be when you finish. So you're starting off with a bit of soap. Take the worst of it off. Move the paint around. Let the paint dry. Get the cloth. Wipe the paint off, then go to a 400, sand down any bumps, brush that off, finish it with a 12, brush it down again, and in some cases you can actually get away with just using primer as your top coat, as your final coat, but on these models I wouldn't advise it. But this is now ready to put your top coat on of your colour of your choice. So you want to be choosing colours from car spray paint, and you want to go for gloss. And you want to put your gloss car paint colours on this model, on top of the paint like this, right? And that is how you do primer, okay? Nice and easy, when you know how. Right, so when you're about to do your paint, you want to make sure that the primer paint is really, really soft and smooth. It should be quite reflective, almost shiny. So when you're finished sanding it down with your wet and dry, it should be like a nice shiny sheen on that layer, which is about right. What you want to do is you want to get a bit of double-sided sellotape, take a bit of double-sided sellotape off and stick a bit of foam to the inside of your model, the part that you're not going to spray, like this, right? Which means you can turn it around nicely and you can pick it up and take it and put it down somewhere else. What you also want to do is make sure it's free of dust. So you want to get yourself a nice soft cloth like this and just clean it up, make sure there's no dust on it at all, no dust particles, like that. Right, so that's about ready to spray. And what you want to do, you just basically shake the can for a couple of minutes so it's about right. Now you want to spray from about 1.5 to 2 feet away. You don't want to be too close. If you're too close, you'll build up too much paint too quickly. And don't be tempted to put lots of paint on. Basically just try and take it steady, take it slow, apply a little bit at a time, and don't overdo the paint. You're better off doing a very light coat first and then come back and do another one. It'll probably take about 3 coats, but don't feel tempted to spray on too much and don't get it too close. Don't spray like from here, spray from about the width away from your hand to your elbow. That's about how far away you should be, and build it up in layers and spray from one side to the other like that. Spray and then spray again and build it up. And take about 3 attempts to get it right, that way you'll get a nicer coat on the paint. As soon as you start to see the paint getting wet in a certain place, you want to back off a little bit, because that means the paint's building up in one place too much. So you want to do it from a distance where you can't get too much paint in one place. It should dry quite quickly in a booth, which is a benefit. Sometimes I'm spraying from left to right, sometimes I'm spraying up to down. It just depends on where the paint needs to go. Nice and gentle, don't rush it. As soon as you rush it and you get a build up of paint in one place, it's very hard to put that right again without really sanding it off. So just keep turning it around. Keep working at it. Like that. If I have a look at this, if I pick it up and have a look, there are some bits in here which I haven't managed to get, so I probably need to bring that close to the edge to get underneath. But it's got a fairly even spray coat all around it. I just need to change the angle I'm spraying at a bit to try and catch these edges, and that's about it. So try not to get your fingerprints on it, try and build it up nice and slowly, don't rush it. That's one coat. I'll probably do 2 more or maybe 3. I probably will use a whole can on this to get the whole thing done, but just try not to rush your paint. Do it in little steps. Even if it takes you 4 coats to get it right, you're better off doing that than trying to rush it in 1 or 2. Alright, brilliant. So if you look closely here, I've put about 6 coats on now to this paint, and I've been doing it up very, very gently, layer by layer by layer, and you should see that the shine on it is quite reflective, but I've been doing that by building that up. I haven't done it in one, so it's actually taken me 6 coats to get to this effect like this. Now the paint is still quite wet at the moment, but that will settle down, so you've got to leave it, once you've done, just leave it to settle down for quite a long time, and that will come up really, really nice. There's no beading on the paint, there's not too much in any particular spot. You can even see the camera reflected in that, which is nice. It's these bits on the side, obviously they're going to have buttons in here, here. So what I've done is I've sprayed a couple of bottle tops, which you can kind of see in the distance here, and they're going to be for the buttons. So these are just caps. I've just sprayed these up so it looks like plastic like that. It's quite good, and you know, even on the white you can't quite catch it the same, but it should have a little bit of a plastic sort of feel to it by the time it's finished. Yeah, so take your time, build your spray coat up really slowly, don't rush it, and if you get a nice finish like this, you're probably going to need to leave it for, I'll probably leave this for at least a full day to dry, because otherwise what happens is the top coat feels dry but the coat underneath is still wet. You don't want that. So I would leave this for probably 2 days to dry, if I'm going to be completely honest, and make sure that it's 100% done when I pick it up. Yeah, so that's why you've got to give yourself a lot of time with these models. You can't rush them, otherwise the finish is bad. Alright, so 6 coats of paint built up slowly over the space of about an hour and a half, 15 minutes between each coat to give it time to dry, and then you're going to need to leave it for at least a full day to dry properly, if not more, before you start sticking bits together and sticking on transfers and stickers and things like that. Okay, brilliant, good stuff.